One of the biggest stories of 2020 is the explosion of protests and unrest around the country for racial justice, a fight that is as old as the nation itself. The civil rights movement of the 60s was centralized. It had clear leaders and a national message that local groups also adopted. And the new iteration of that movement for racial justice does not look or feel the same. And that's by design. These new organizers are less willing to work within the system. They are looking at more than just policy change and are looking past politicians as they push for that change. For some folks in DC, this has caused some confusion as lawmakers sympathetic to the cause try to see how they fit into all of it. That's why I wanted to talk to Rashad Robinson. He's the president of Color of Change, one of the largest civil rights advocacy organizations in the country, to break it all down. How have you been?
I'm all right. I actually, I'm really feeling focused and determined. There is so much possible right now that I didn't imagine. And I spent a lot of, weeks like really frustrated and sad through Corona, through some of the police killings. But now, seeing the sort of people taking real steps to not accept the short-sighted solutions and actually push for real change.
I think right now what's happening is that the media and politicians are having a hard time gauging and getting into and figuring out what's happening at this time with social justice organizations, because my understanding is that the lack of a clear leader is on purpose, right? There was never anyone that was supposed to be empowered to speak on behalf of everyone.
No, not only was there never supposed to be, but that didn't work. There is not a single leader because we are also a much more sort of diverse movement. And there was this theory of Black faces in high places sort of being the pathway. If we could just integrate the boardroom, if we could just integrate the sort of C-suites, institutions by the mere sort of aspect of our presence would change. And so at Color of Change, we've really developed this framework of not mistaking presence for power. Presence and visibility and awareness is not a bad thing. Like, building presence is not a bad thing, but when we mistake presence for power, we think we've done something that we haven't actually done. So an example of that is we think a Black president means that we are post-racial. We think that a lot of Black pop stars that America loves means that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture. And America can love Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And those two things don't actually always have to be in conflict.
I think a reason that the media and politicians are having a hard time gauging this moment is because it's not just about federal policy. It's an issue that touches on policy change, cultural change. It is about mindset change, right? Like, it is about everything that is a part of American life has to change, right? Behavior change.
When I talk about power is the ability to change the rules, I always say it's the written rules and it's the unwritten rules. And so what actually are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to create a more human and less hostile world, a world where that society can be on people's side, or are we trying to pass laws and believe that laws alone, we have this theory that people don't experience issues, they experience life. That the forces that hold people back are deeply interrelated, that a racist criminal justice system requires a racist media culture to keep it alive, that economic inequality goes hand in hand with political inequality, that these things all sort of work together. There's not a silver bullet. The other thing that we focused a lot on is working to say what we mean when we talk about these issues, right? And so an example is like, we will say Black people are less likely to get loans from the bank, instead of saying banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. We will say Black people are less likely to get hired by tech companies, instead of tech companies are less likely to hire Black people. We'll say Black people are less likely to get hired into newsrooms in journalism, instead of newsrooms have systemically excluded Black people for years. And this is why this is important in terms of the movement, right? Because on one hand, right, when you talk about the banks, you talk about newsrooms, right? You'll say, people will be like, oh yes, we should give some financial literacy programs to those Black people. Or we should do a mentorship and pipeline program for those Black people so they're prepared when they get into the newsroom. because we're fixing Black people, because we're asking ourselves what's wrong with Black people. On the other hand, we are facing our energy at the system and the structure that has systemically excluded us. Don't fix me to deal with a bank that from its founding excluded me and said that they never wanted to, and now blame it on me to like get better, to like show up at a system that has created all sorts of barriers and targeted me. Don't fix me to deal inside of a newsroom that has systemic exclusion and racism and all those things that have prevented me from being able to succeed. And so part of this is recognizing that we're not going to mentor ourselves out of systemic racism. And far too often we end up with charitable solutions to structural problems. Charity instead of justice. No, we have to fix and change systems, because in a country that actually has more Black millionaires and billionaires than ever before, we know systems will realign and design themselves to let a few of us in while keeping the sort of gaps in systems sort of just the way they are and keep the power structures.